Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Red Path. It's Dara here with you again today. We got a new episode of Delvarus is in the Details. Today we're going for a popular one. It's one that's been requested an awful lot of me recently, and it's an update to how I weather power armor, so my white 30k World Leader color scheme. Now, we're going to be diving into a lot of kind of advanced techniques today, just a heads up, but it's going to be a really fun one. So grab yourselves a brew and let's dive into the video. Okay, so weathering white power armor, that's going to be the topic for today's video. Now this has been, loads of people have been asking me to update this recently, give a concise and clear walkthrough of my process for weathering, what I do to my models, kind of post acrylics to make them jump out and look aged, battle worn, all that kind of good stuff. So the techniques we're going to be using today, they're a little bit advanced, but with some practice and some learning, I'm sure everyone can master them as well. We're going to be working with enamels, we're going to be working with oils, and a little bit with acrylics as well. But it's all going to come together to give a really nice and realistic effect. And realism is the important part of weathering, trying to recreate what would naturally happen or what would be caused on the battlefield. So we're going to be working through all this stuff. Feel free to grab something to experiment on while we're working through all this and try it out yourself at home. It's going to be fun, so let's dive into it. Okay, what's up everyone? So for today's tutorial, I've chosen a very specific piece to demonstrate as much weathering techniques for power armor as possible. The piece I've chosen is this large armor panel, which is from the Greater Brass Scorpion that I'm painting up in a minute. So you can see we've kind of put down a lot of base coats already. We've done in the white, and we've put a base coat for the armor trim down as well. I've also added a nice little freehand design on the front of it, and that's kind of where we're at right now. So this is pretty much the point where I would add the first type of weathering. Now, when we're considering a piece like this, it's very important to think about the distribution of different weathering techniques that we're going to be doing, and making sure that we don't overdo any one single effect so that the entire piece won't get overcrowded unless you're going for a heavily weathered effect. So we're going to keep that in mind throughout the tutorial, but what we're going to be doing first is putting on some chipping. So that's going to be coming up next. Okay, so to do our chipping, what we've got here is a little bit of sponge, and I've taken a mix of Rhinox hide and Chaos Black, and basically what we're going to do is load the sponge up with paint, get rid of most of it, and start dabbing this on in random patterns to create some sponge chipping. Now, this will kind of vary depending on how much you've left on the brush or on the sponge and how much you've taken off. So at the start we've got very small amounts coming on here, and that's just going to help kind of give us an idea of where we're going to be putting in some heavier chips. So then we're going to load up our sponge again with a bit more paint and kind of go back in and add some of these heavier chipping patterns. Now when you're adding these chips, it's important to remember that there's going to be a lot of other weathering coming on later on. So let's not overdo it at this point. And this is why we do the freehand first, because it wouldn't really make much sense for the chipping to happen before the freehand designs, because at the end of the day these chips will occur after the paint has been put on. So we're basically kind of keeping it random in terms of like the size of the chips, and because this is such a large armor piece, we can kind of move around it as we see fit and just vary up our patterns. So it's a little bit random, but that's how we want to keep it. And remember, we're not going to overdo it on this step either. I think we'll add quite a larger chipped area up here, just to simulate somewhere that it's taken quite a bit of damage. The amount of pressure as well that you put on the sponge when you're applying it will determine how large the chip sizes are as well. But I think for now that's pretty okay for the chipping. What we're going to do now is come back with some scratch marks. So that's coming up next. So for the scratch marks, basically what we've done is we've taken that same mix as before and we've taken a small brush. And what we're going to do is very quickly kind of come in on the model and just lightly do some long patterns like this. So this will kind of add some extra variety to the chips that we've already added, and kind of simulate different types of weathering and damage that the armor segment might have accrued over time. And it's important to be very fast when you do this, and also to vary up the angle that you're coming in, so not all your chips are kind of at that same angle, and also vary up the length of them so that it doesn't look too uniform. Avoiding uniformity is the most important part of weathering. You want things to look natural, and weathering occurs somewhat randomly. So make sure that you're kind of trying to incorporate that randomness and avoid any possible buildup of patterns. So at this stage we can also kind of go back on some of these sponge chipped areas if we want to kind of incorporate a little bit of a bigger chip and bring in some of those satellite patterns and make one larger one, as we're kind of doing here. And we'll do that up here as well, try and bind these together so it actually just becomes one larger chip. And that can help kind of vary up the whole tone, make things a little bit more interesting. So that's going to be pretty much it for the initial steps of the armor chipping. And what we're going to do now is finish doing that trim, and then we're going to varnish the model with some satin varnish, and then we're going to come on to some washes and the actual real interesting parts of the weathering process. So that's going to be coming up next. Okay, so we're just applying our oil wash at this stage, which is a mix of raw umber and lamp black. Same as we normally do for our oil washes, nothing really all that different here. And we're just going to let this cure out for a couple of hours, and then come in with the reductive technique and take all of it off. So I've made a pretty diluted one because our surface area is so big, but it's just to kind of tint the whole area a little bit. So once that's dried out, we'll come back and take a look at taking that all off. That's going to be up next. Okay, so we've given our oil paint some time to dry, and basically what we're going to be doing is taking some of our mineral spirits now and using a Q-tip to get rid of most of the oil paint. So we're just going to kind of come back in on it and gradually pulling that paint away. So it'll take a little while to get this done, but it shouldn't be too difficult. So we're working that white back in. We're still going to have some of that tint that we laid down from the oil paint. And it's going to kind of unify the whole design piece here together. So I'm going to work on removing all that, and once that's done, we're going to come back for the next step, which will be starting to really work in the proper weathering patterns. So that's coming up next. Okay, so we have finished letting that wash be cleaned up and dried out. What we're going to do now, start adding some streaks. So I'm using Track Rust for our first one from Armour, and what we're going to start with is a little pin wash just in and around these areas where the armor panel meets the trim. And while we're doing that, we're also going to add some preliminary streaks coming down. So what you want to do is just kind of drag vertically down like this. And don't worry if it's messy, because we're going to be cleaning that up in the next step. So just kind of letting capillary action work here and adding a little bit of depth to the areas around the trim, make it pop out a little bit more, and putting the first of our streaks in as well. Always good to vary up the lengths of your streaks too, that's pretty important. Generally with these as well, you want to start with the darkest tone and work towards the brightest tone as well, so you get some nice layered effects going on. And we won't put too many streaks on just right now because we don't want to overcrowd it. So I'm going to get that penciled in, and then we're going to come back to clean this up. That's coming up next. Okay, so we've kind of added a bunch of streaks and pin washing now. So what we're going to do is clean this up. We're going to take some of our thinner here again, and basically we're going to go back in and edit these areas that we've done. So we're just going to push that wash right back into the recesses with an old brush and feather it out as well. So essentially just going back and cleaning up, leaving as much as you want to. And then for the streaks, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of come in from the side here and just feather inwards to edit them. Pull them back towards the source. So get these nice streaking patterns. Now you can pull as much as you want off from these streaks, which will make some of them fainter, some of them kind of stand out more aggressively. Basically there's a lot of room to play around with the streaks at this point. So we are just making sure that we're keeping some of that initial pin wash down while getting rid of those parts that we don't really want. So we're just going to go over the whole model and pencil that in, and then we're going to come back for the next step. Okay, so we've cleaned up a lot of those streaks and that pin wash. You can see we're already adding quite a nice bit of tone here. So we're going to vary up our weathering by adding some streaking grime from Armour. So what we're going to do for this is not as dramatic a pin wash, and we're going to add a couple more streak areas because they're going to be a different color to that initial track rust. So it'll give some nice variation in the types of streaks that we have. We are going to pin wash it in some areas, again to weather up the type of tones that we're laying down here, but mostly for this we're just going to be adding some bonus streaks in. So as much or as little as you like here, really. I tend not to do too much of this one because we're going to add one more paint after this as well, and streaking grime tends to be quite a strong streak, if that makes sense. I guess it's in the name. So we're just going to play around with some of that there, and again we're being pretty loose with how we lay it down because we have that nice little cleanup step to kind of correct and edit anything that we feel like. We're going to lay down a little bit of a fainter one up here. A smaller one too. Like I said, it's important to vary the lengths of the streaks so that you don't get anything too repetitive or any patterns building up either. So we're going to basically repeat that previous step with the editing, and then we're going to come back for the last effect, which is going to be a rust that we're going to be adding in. So that's coming up next. Okay, so we are almost done with our streaking effects at this point. You can see we've built up a nice kind of pattern and variation in tone. But what we're going to do is add some streaking rust effects now from Armour. And here we are going to pin wash again in some areas to add like kind of areas where rust will have built up around that armor joint. Now typically this is going to be kind of towards the bottom of the armor plating because that's where water would naturally kind of collect over time and cause rust to build up. So you can see we're kind of focusing around that bottom half here for the rust, and the kind of areas by these little triangles as well where it would naturally kind of pool over time. So it is important to think about that kind of realism when you're putting on these effects, like where would these effects naturally occur. So we are focusing on that. Now we are going to add a couple of rust streaks as well because they're always really nice. They stand out really well against white armor. So let's add a happy little streak coming down here. Why don't we add one over here too? Ooh, that's a bit big, but that's okay because the beauty of mineral spirits, we can clean that right up. A nice little one coming in here. So we are just going around putting in some of those rust effects, letting that capillary action do a lot of the work for us. down right about here. Okay, and I think we will just pool a little bit more right here at the bottom. So basically, it's going to be the same process. We're going to clean it up just as we did before. After that, I'm probably going to add a little bit of light rust wash in the same way. We're going to focus on those rust areas again. It's a much brighter rust, so we're going to apply it less liberally and just kind of focus to highlight those rust parts. Once all that's cleaned up, we're going to let it cure. It's probably going to take about a day to fully cure out. But once that's done, we're going to come back in, see what it's looking like, see if we want to add any more effects, and then potentially add some oil blending too. So tune in for that next. Okay, so we've given the weathering some time to cure out, and it's looking pretty good now. We have some nice variation in different streaking effects, and we have a nice little pin wash built up too. So to polish this all off and bring it all together, what we're going to do is add some oil blending. Now, I've already done a video on oil blending, which you can check out separately, but we'll work through it here. So I've taken some raw umber, and what we're going to do is we're going to grab two different brushes. One's going to be an application brush. We're just going to use that to put a couple of dots of oil paint without any thinner down in the base of these areas here. We're going to repeat this where we want to generate a lot of shadows, because basically this step is all going to be about generating nice shadowy effects, which will give the surface a more aged look as well. So once we have these dots laid down, what we're going to do is grab our second brush and just start working in. Now, basically how this is going to work is we'll take the brush like this, go into the dot and slowly start to feather outwards. And as we feather outwards, we will blend out that oil paint, creating quite a nice little blend here. So you can see we're already generating pretty nice shadow, and we're probably going to go back and do a second layer of this oil blending just to deepen the shadow. But the more you work it, the better it kind of blends in overall. So you can see we're kind of doing a lot of this circular motion here to make sure that it's not having too stark of a difference with the white, but it's a very subtle effect, but it's already making a nice little difference here. So we're just working through that and blending out that oil paint. Now you can mix in different tones if you like. If you want to really create a very strong shadow, we could do some black in here. I don't think we're going to do that for this. I think we'll probably just settle with maybe one more layer of raw umber, or burnt umber even, just to really enunciate those darker areas. We also don't really want to obscure any of that nice weathering that we've already achieved on this guy. So we probably won't be too aggressive with this. So what I'm going to do is basically put all this down, and then we're going to come back and take a look at what it's looking like then. What's coming up next? Okay, so after applying a second oil wash, this is kind of what it's looking like now, this armor panel. And I think this is pretty much getting towards the end of the weathering. So what I'll probably do is do a little bit more kind of stuff around the trim here, which we've brightened up. But overall, I think this is quite nice. Now, let me just show you folks an example of one of the other armor panels of the Brass Scorpion, give you an idea of where we started with and where we've gotten to. So this is one of the ones that I haven't done anything with. Obviously, this is the one that we've been working on. So you can see there is a very, very substantial difference here between the two armor panels. Like, they would sit over each other like this. So we've really gone with something that, you know, is just very much the basic space coat and all that kind of stuff. We've really added a lot of life, environment, and all the other cool stuff to that. So that is pretty much going to be it. That is really my current definitive guide to how I weather my white armored models. You can apply a lot of this to the red and brass scheme for 40k berserkers as well. So let's wrap this one up and summarize everything we've learned today. It's going to be coming up next. Well everyone, that's it for this episode of Delvarus is in the details. I hope it was a fun one and that you learned a little bit about my process for weathering, maybe picked up some ideas for things you can do yourself. If you found this useful, do let me know down below. I'd love to see any of you progress with your own styles and start to incorporate some of these techniques into your painting. Make sure to tag me in the Discord, hop in there as well, join the conversation. If you really like what we do, we have Patreon that you can subscribe to. We also have our affiliate links with Element Games, so on and so forth. It's all down below, so feel free to support the channel. Just give it a like, comment, all the kind of good stuff. We've got lots more fun hobby content coming up soon, so until the next one folks, stay healthy, stay safe,